Hiya guys, hope you're well. So I have bought a brand new Bremont, and as you'd expect, I haven't taken it off for the last few days. It's been a really enjoyable experience, and here are my initial thoughts on the Supermarine S301. I'm Andrew, and I'm a watch addict. Right, so I have picked up this beautiful Bremont, vintage inspired. There's no getting away from that look and that vibe, and you either dig that or you don't dig it. That's totally acceptable. And this watch is just for me a little bit special. I am really enjoying the sizings. Now, Bremont are known for their larger size watches, 43mm sort of sizings, but this is a 40mm vintage inspired dive watch, and the comfort, the sizing is just perfect for me. I'm really enjoying it, to be honest. So as I said, it's 40mm case, and it comes in at 12.5 thick, and it's got the triptych design, which that obviously isn't vintage inspired, but overall the dial, the sizing is really good. It's only got a 48mm lug to lug, but the bad thing is that it's a bugbear of mine on most watches, is that the bracelet protrudes over the actual lugs, and it ends up being about 51.5mm lug to lug because of that. But because it is a small watch, it does sort of fit around my wrist very perfect. 20mm lugs, which you'd expect, which is a really good size. Unfortunately though, there's no taper on this watch, which again is one of my things that I do look out for and enjoy massively on a watch. And the clasp is a 22mm sizing, which overall it goes with the watch, and it's not as bad as it sounds. Like I prefer a taper, and then on top of that I prefer a slender clasp as well. Now, you can't get away from the fact that there is another similar sized vintage inspired with gilt dial and hands and markers on the market, and that's a Tudor Black Bay 58. And I think most people would sway towards Tudor at that stage. Whether you think it's worth the £3,300 retail is totally subjective. So the water resistance on this, because it is a vintage inspired watch, it's actually 300 meters. So I think that's a pretty good thing. Another negative about the watch is the fact that it's only 38 hours power reserve. Now, that's not the end of the world if you're going to wear it on a daily basis, but if you're like me and you're chopping and changing, it's nice to have a 38 power reserve ready to go, and they're not always, because they can run out quite quickly. So I'm going to have to keep it in the watch rider when I'm not wearing it. On the flip side, this is actually a chronometer watch, as all Bremonts are, and the accuracy, as you would expect, is right up there. Now, it's got Superluminova, which is a good thing, and they're on the cathedral hands, and they do shine out quite well, but because it's vintage inspired, they're not applied markers, so the lume on the markers is good at best. It's okay, it's not great, but on a vintage inspired looking watch, I wouldn't expect amazing lume, if you know what I mean. It sort of counteracts itself, doesn't it? Again, something else that sort of counteracts the vintage inspired vibe is that it's got a ceramic bezel. But again, it's a matte ceramic bezel, and it does look in keeping with the watch and the design. The engraved case back, and it's got the triptych case design, which is definitely not vintage inspired, but is very unique and true to Bremont. And it's sort of a mix of vintage and Bremont, which I really like about this watch. Now, if you go on Bremont's webpage, it tells you a little brief explanation of why they call it the Supermarine watch. The watch's namesake derives from the 1930s aircraft company Supermarine, whose first ever Spitfire prototype, the Type 300, led to one of Britain's most iconic aircraft. So it's named Aviation Way, again about Bremont and their aviation connections, so it sort of fits in with it. I suppose you've got to name a watch something, haven't you? So it ties in quite nicely. This watch is very vintage inspired, and that's a good thing for me personally, and you can tell that in the colour of the markers and on the bezel, and the cathedral hands are really nice. Vintage inspired doesn't mean vintage quality. And what do I mean by that? Well, it looks vintage in certain aspects, but the bezel, the action of it is absolutely fantastic. You might not get that on a vintage actual watch. The ceramicness of it as well, so it's not really a vintage material, is it? The case build and quality, the lume on the hands, the COSC certified, they're all things that are, it's a hint of vintage inspired, but it's not a vintage watch. It's modern, build quality is fantastic, the bracelet is really comfy, it's got a nice drape on it, The bracelet has also got half links as well, and the clasp is a really nice action. Not much micro adjustment, but I am starting to live with a lack of micro adjustment more than I ever have. And I think on what I'm trying to do is sort of cultivate my entire collection around the 39-40mm sizing. So that's the Globemaster, the Black Bay, this. There's a couple are in the pipeline that I'm thinking of selling and thinking of getting in. And if I go for that size, no matter what watch I wear on what day, it's going to feel very similar. And at that sizing, micro adjustment just isn't as important as it is on a bigger watch like the Seamaster, for example. Now, the details on the lugs and the polished bevel edge, I mean, it's ultimately a tool watch, and it's very brushed, but just on the bezel, just on the lugs, there's a beveled edge and a little bit of polishing, and I think it's a really, really nice touch. Another nice touch is on the crown. It's got this little golden yellowy piece of metal. It don't have to be there, but they've added it in, and that just ties in nicely with a vintage inspired colouring of the markers, the hands and the bezel. Now the too good, too bad on this watch, and I repeat myself constantly on the bad, it's that a lack of taper is one and a lack of micro adjustment on another. And I just think the lack of taper, I just think it must be a production thing, because if you've just got to produce links all in that size, it's a lot easier than producing one that size, one that size, one that size, one that size. I'm totally guessing, that just my guess, but I think, yeah, is it a production thing, a cost thing, why you don't have a tapered bracelet? Because I'd like to know your thoughts, guys. Who out there likes a straight bracelet over a tapered one? I bet there can't be many, can there? In fact, I think I'm going to put a poll out there, because it's just, for me, it's just an obvious thing, but it must be a cost thing why you don't get a tapered bracelet on some watches. It gotta be. And the too good, the overall comfort of this watch has absolutely been really enjoyable. Looking at it online, I did worry a little bit about the crown, because it looks like it sticks out quite a lot, and I did worry that it's going to rub in the back of my hand, but I've had no discomfort. It's been really comfort. It's draped around my wrist absolutely perfectly, to be honest. So for me, it's been a really good all-day, everyday watch. A real tool watch, a go anywhere, do anything watch. And the last good is the build quality, the overall build quality, the triptych case design. I love that personally. It might not be for everybody. For me, it's really unique, really good looking. So yeah, the overall build quality, the bezel action, for me, has been brilliant. So a 40mm vintage inspired dive watch in the collection just hits a sweet spot for me. I've got this in black. I've got the Globemaster in white. I've got the Tudor Black Bay 58 in blue. There's a couple of others in the pipeline. The Seamaster might be on the chopping block, but I'll say more about that in a later video. Right, guys, let me know what you think of Bremont as a brand. What you think of this watch personally. Would you have it? Would you buy it? I definitely love this watch. It's better than my other Bremont in the collection. I think this is a better size, better looking watch. And for me, it's a winner. I'm in love. Ooh la la. Right, guys, over and out. I'll see you in the next one.